can change at any given time, depending on what we do with the flex direction, and how the items lay themselves out on the page is entirely up to the flex axes. So the examples that I'm going to go through tonight stick with this base. Main axis goes from left to right, and the cross axis goes from top to bottom. But if you were to ever change those with flex direction, you can expect your items to be flipped, or at least to be going from left to right instead of right to left. So let's go into sort of like 4 examples here. And I've put these up on CodePen. I'm just going to code through them with you. Hopefully you can see these. I tried to make it nice and big. This is my pet peeve when I'm at a meetup and the font is tiny. Um, what I've got here, let's just go through the HTML first. I've got a div with a class of boxes, and then I've got 3 boxes inside each one of them, and then I just have some text inside of them. So like nothing super special about that. And then what I've done in the CSS is I haven't done any of the Flexbox stuff just yet, but I've just put a background color on each of them so you can tell where each one is. I jacked up the font size, I aligned centered as I'm padding, and then really the only important thing here is that I gave them a width of 100px, and we'll talk about that in just a second. So if I would want to make this into Flexbox, my first question is, what is my flex container? Well, if we take a peek at this HTML here, the flex container is like the parent, and then the flex items are the individual boxes. So I go into .boxes and I just say display flex. And immediately what that's going to do is it's going to put them side by side, because by default, Flexbox goes in a row and it tries to put them all on the same line. Now, that isn't flexible at all, because I've just put display flex on here and I give them a width of 100px. But the interesting part is the flex part of Flexbox. We have the boxes. There's no flex here. The flex part of this. Oh, I thought someone was calling me. Is that Flexbox answers the question, what do you do with this extra space? So we've got this width here, and it seems to be about 400 pixels, and I've only taken up 300 of those pixels with my boxes. Now, what I need to then do is, if I set a flex grow on each of those boxes to 1, what they will do is they will then stretch themselves out. So flex grow answers the question, what do I do with the extra space? Now, what does 1 mean? 1 means, you can think of a flex grow and also a flex shrink as it's a proportional value. It's not pixels, it's not rems or ems or anything like that. But if there is extra space, who should get it? And when we give a value of 1 to each of them, we're essentially saying you should split them up evenly amongst each other. Now, what you can also do is, when there is extra space, you can say someone else should get a little bit more space than the other. So if I go to box 2 here and I say flex grow of 2, what then happens? You see how let me go back. See how it's growing and shrinking there? And that's because we're saying out of the extra 100 pixels that we have, remember, let me show you once more. Remember that we had that extra room right here. Who should get it? And if I just put a flex grow on one of them, that one item is going to take all the extra room. However, if I give each of the boxes a flex grow, they're all going to proportionally take the extra space themselves. But then you can start jacking that number up on individual boxes. Like box 2, if I get a flex grow of 5, it's going to take 5 times the amount of the extra room than its siblings. Now, on the flip side, if we take that away and take that away, there is also a question about what happens when there is not enough room. See, like right about here, we said width 100, and you might be asking, well, if I go really small, they're clearly not width 100. What happens when there's not enough room? We can use what's called a flex shrink, and it's the opposite. It says who's going to give up more of themselves when things come to push and shove, who's going to cut up most of themselves. So maybe box 2 would have a flex shrink of something like 5. And as soon as it starts to get small, let's see how box 2 is the only one resizing itself, whereas box 1 and 3 stay the same. And then eventually they're going to start to resize themselves. But because flex box 2 has a shrink of 5, it says, I will give 5 times up my own body fat than the other boxes because I'm not as important. So those are two important concepts behind it. The other one is what's called a flex basis. And now I've used width here, and I want to encourage you to think that you might not need a flex a flex basis in a lot. But if you ever see or ever need to use a flex basis is sort of like, I like to call it an ideal width, where if everything is rosy, I want to be 200 pixels wide. If there's more room, we'll grow. If there's less room, we'll cut each other up and take a little bit out of ourselves. But the flex basis is your ideal value at the end of the day. So quick review of that one. We took the boxes, we displayed flex on it. What that does is automatically puts them all on one row. If I'd like them to go on their own rows, what we can do is flex wrap. What that will do is as soon as you run out of room, they'll wrap onto their own line. So that is the first one. I'm going to go on over to the second one here, which is a menu layout. And what I've got here is I've got an unordered list with the class of menu. And inside of that, I have a list item. Inside of each list, I've got a paragraph tag, which says something like fried halibut, and a span with a class of price. Now, this is a fairly common layout that you might want. You might get this from an actual designer. And what you can do to make this line up, see how this one is multiple lines, this one is 2 lines, some of them are bigger, some of them are smaller, but we want the price to always go on the right hand, vertically centered on the right hand side of it. So what do we then do with that? Well, let's go to our list item here, and we'll say display flex. And already they are going inside of each other. And what's interesting about this is maybe if I were to put a border on each of the flex items, so got menu li, every single flex item, say border 1px solid red, you'll see that these are the 2 flex items. We've got our paragraph tag and our actual span here. Now, if I wanted them to this one to go on the right hand side, I would quickly look at my Flexbox CSS tricks, and you see that we have this one, justified content, and by default, they are going to be flex start. They're all going to the left hand side, but we can take that extra space and divvy it up in between each of the items. So I'll jump on over to my LI here, and I'll say justify content, space between. And then, okay, that's good. Now they are on the left and the right. You see that the item is on the left and the item is on the right. If there's multiple lines, it's going to wrap, no problem, but they're still not centered. So I can say align items center. What that will do, see how that snap by default, the align items is what's called stretch, and it's going to stretch across the entire height of the element. But if I align the item center, it's going to bring itself up into the middle of that actual element.
Hey, Wes, I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you go back to your CodePen? There you go. Can you take align item center out for a second?
Yeah.
Will we see that the paragraphs have a very defined height, but the spans with the prices span the whole height of the container? Why is that?
It's because there is a margin on, I think, because there's a margin on that element. Let me do a quick, So that paragraph has a margin on it. Oh, know why it's not working? Because I don't know how to spell margin. margin
Yeah.
0. There we go. And then it will
Ah,
actually snap itself. So by default, it will stretch itself across, but it doesn't ignore your box model. It still uses margin and border into it, takes those into account.
gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
No problem. So let me take that. By the way, this little selector, very handy because your flex items aren't necessarily always going to have a class. They're not necessarily always going to be the same type. In this case, I have a paragraph and a span. So what I've done here is you do use a direct descendant selector, and then you can always select your flex children. So that's looking pretty good. I'm a little bit zoomed in here, but it's nice and flexible that if this was really small, it would always be in the actual center. I didn't have to do any funky positioning to get that to work. Next one up is a pricing layout, and I think I can show you where. Oh no, not this one. The next one I'll show you where it was in. Actually, no, this one. This one is on my website, learnredux.com, where I've got this $0.000, and I previously that would have been very hard to actually bump this down, this in the middle, that in the middle, and then this in the top, without having to use any sort of like absolute positioning and relative wrapper hacks. So really easy way to do this. And first of all, I want to get this square in the middle. So I've got this wrapper here. So what I can do is first we want to center that. I'm going to say display flex on the wrapper. And I can say justify content center. And that's going to center it along the main axis, which is left to right. And then if we want to center it vertically, we say align items center. And that should center it vertically. It's actually not working. And this is the thing that frustrates quite a few people with it. And I want to visualize this for you by just putting a background on this item. See how tall this wrapper is? How tall is a wrapper? As high as the content makes it go. So if you want to vertically center something, make sure that your wrapper actually has some sort of defined height on it. So what I like to do is give it a min height of 100 VH, and that is a viewport unit, and that will give it a background red. That will give it a, oh, I can't spell today. Any day. There we go. Then that will give it a good height and we can center it there. So that works. Now let's actually work on this price thing. A quick peek at the HTML here. We got a div with a class of price. And then the $sign is wrapped in a span of currency. The 19 is wrapped in a span with dollars. And the 95 is wrapped in a class with cents. So if we go to this dot price, we can display flex on that right away. And what's interesting about that is you see how immediately it got like not as wide? And that's because when you display flex on something, all of the inline element, oh, thank you, CodePen. All of the inline elements will give up their inline spaces. Now I want to align everything right in the middle here. So I can say justify content center. And, oh no, not justify content, align items center. Why? Because I justify content is for the main axis, left to right. I'm concerned about top to bottom centering right here. So that's what's called the cross axis, which is top to bottom by default. So I've got the $sign 19. Now, the funny thing is this 95, I actually want to go in the top right here. So what you can do is you can overwrite aligned items on a per element basis. So if I go to cents, and I use align self, what that will do is it'll overwrite any align items which we declared on the parent with itself. So we can say our options are, if we look at our guide here, are flex start, flex end, center, stretch, and baseline if you're doing some text stuff. So we want flex start here. We'll pop it right up in the corner. If it's not perfect for you, what we can do is go back to our price and change our line height to something like 0.8 or 0.9 and just start monkeying around. There we go, 0.9. That will give it. And to sort of visualize that, if I put a background on this actual element, or if I put a background on the, what is that? The big one, the dollars. See that what we're working here, the line height changed it to be that high with the 0.9. I could change that to 0.4, and you could see that that's the actual line height that we're computing here, and that's why the 95 is sticking where it should be. So I usually like to do like a 1 or something like a 0.8. It starts to look pretty good. Any questions about that one?